All right. Good morning, everybody. Good morning. Good morning. We're going to go ahead and get started. I want to welcome all of the members of the Elder Justice Coordinating Council, and then certainly all the others who have joined us for this meeting via live stream from all around the country. My name is Lance Robertson, and I'm the Assistant Secretary for Aging and the Administrator for the Administration for Community Living at the Department of Health and Human Services. And as the delegated chair of the Elder Justice Coordinating Council, I'm honored to convene and open this virtual meeting. So I'm pleased to be among my colleagues today representing now 15 federal agencies. These are departments that, again, are demonstrating our continued coordination and commitment in the federal government to address elder abuse, neglect, and exploitation. So via virtual roll call now, let me introduce you to these individuals. Joining us from the U.S. Postal Inspection Service is Chief Inspector Gary Barksdale. From the Department of Justice, the Associate Deputy Attorney General, Tony Bacon. From the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission, Commissioner Rosman. And joining us from the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, Deputy Assistant Secretary for Enforcement and Programs, David Enzel. From the Social Security Commission, Acting Associate Commissioner Jeffrey Buckner. From the Federal Trade Commission, the Elder Justice Coordinator in the Bureau of Consumer Protection, Luis Greisman. From the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, Deputy Assistant Director in the Office of Older Americans, Michael Herndon. From the Department of Veteran Affairs, the Deputy Chief Counsel, Krista Schreiber. From the U.S. Department of Treasury, the Director of the Financial Security Education, Louisa Quitman. From the Corporation for National and Community Service, the Director of Senior Corps, Deborah Cox-Roush. From the Department of Agriculture and the National Institute of Food and Agriculture, Brent Elrod. And from the U.S. Department of Labor Policy Advisor, Trevor Carlson. From the Department of Interior, the Director of the Bureau of Indian Affairs, Darrell Account. And from the U.S. Department of Homeland Security, Director of Civil Rights and Civil Liberties, Cameron Quinn. So let me then tell you a little bit about our newest member, folks. I know for those of you that have been active in the council for the last couple of years, we had roughly 12, 13 participating agencies, have added some. The newest member, the 15th member, comes to us from the Department of Homeland Security, and that's exciting. So again, we're very glad to have Cameron Quinn joining us. Let me tell you a little bit about her as our newest member. In September of 2017, Ms. Quinn joined the U.S. Department of Homeland Security as Officer for Civil Rights and Civil Liberties. The Office for Civil Rights and Civil Liberties supports the department as it secures the nation while preserving individual liberty, fairness, and equality under the law. So again, we now have the Department of Homeland Security involved with the EJCC, which will bring an added perspective to the challenges that we know Americans face and to the potential solutions. So again, join me in welcoming Ms. Quinn. Thank you for being part of this council now and for representing the Department of Homeland Security. So today's meeting is happening in historic times, as we all know. The public health crisis of COVID-19 has impacted each of our lives in countless ways. It brings new threats and immense new challenges that we know we must address. Sadly, the threat of physical abuse, neglect, and financial exploitation continues during this pandemic, and even worse, we've seen new versions of scams and fraud taking advantage of the situation. So our agenda today is designed to shine a light on financial exploitation during this pandemic, as well as to highlight the important work we on this council and others are doing to stop and prevent financial exploitation across this country. This is also a historical meeting for the simple fact that this is our first virtual convening of the council. So all the EJCC member representatives, speakers, support staff, and the public who are participating from different parts and locations of this country, I welcome you. While we've anticipated to the best that we can all the different technological scenarios, thanks in advance. for your patients should we encounter any difficulty. Now, of course, just to be honest, it would have been easier just to delay this meeting for a number of reasons. But we do believe that it's very important to hold this meeting even in the midst of the pandemic while assuring your safety. And of course, the reason for that is, as we know, perpetrators don't stop. They're not taking a break. There's no timeout because of the pandemic. Therefore, in our federal leadership roles, I think we all have to recommit ourselves that even during the pandemic, this conversation remains so critical. So we're going to start our meeting today by hearing from my boss, the Secretary of the Department of Health and Human Services, via a welcome video. And then we'll move on to our presentations and panel discussions. And of course, there will be an opportunity for council members to ask questions after each panel, just as we traditionally do. And of course, I'm honored now to turn it over to Secretary Alex Azar to give us a welcome and to kick off this meeting.
Good morning and welcome to the first meeting of the Elder Justice Coordinating Council in 2020. I'm grateful for the opportunity I had to chair this council in person at the SEC headquarters in 2018 with the Attorney General and SEC Chairman Jay Clayton. It's unfortunate that this meeting could not occur in person, but I'm glad that our 14 federal departments and agencies have still found a way to come together. I'm excited to see the efforts that will emerge from this and future meetings to protect older Americans, especially during these unprecedented times. President Trump has called for an all-of-America approach to combating COVID-19. Especially on an issue like protecting the elderly, we need coordination among all actors, from federal leadership to state and local governments and community-based partners. As you are keenly aware, concern for older Americans has to be at the center of our COVID-19 response. We need to protect older Americans, whether they live in the community or in an assisted living or skilled nursing facility. By one estimate, 42% of deaths from COVID-19 have been in nursing homes and assisted living facilities, which is why we have put such a focus on these settings. We now require nursing homes to report cases of COVID-19 directly to CDC so that this information is transparent and available to residents, family members, and the public. Through Medicare and Medicaid, we're increasing penalties for facilities with persistent infection control violations. We've expanded funds to purchase digital tablets for residents of nursing facilities to visit with family, carry out telehealth appointments, or if needed, contact their state long-term care ombudsman. To protect older Americans wherever they live, we've required states to provide a specific focus in their testing plans on vulnerable populations, which includes the elderly. We're also working on the specific needs of older Americans who live in the community, who may be encountering special challenges due to social distancing. HHS's Administration for Community Living has pushed out more than $1 billion in funds for services like nutrition that older Americans need to stay in their homes. We also know that isolation can make some older Americans more susceptible to abuse and neglect and financial exploitation. That's why it's so critical that the EJCC, with all of its members, meet during the pandemic. We work together to protect older Americans, to inform them how to protect themselves, to ensure they have the resources to do so, and to make families aware and to let scammers know that they cannot prey on older Americans, that we will prosecute them for these crimes. We've made great progress in strengthening and improving our federal responses to elder maltreatment in recent years, and we've not ceased this work despite the additional challenges we all face during the COVID-19 crisis. ACL's work has not let up during the pandemic. Programs like ACL's State Long-Term Care Ombudsman and State Adult Protective Services programs are bravely and creatively continuing services. Ombudsmen have coordinated with nursing home staff to do virtual walkthroughs where the staff walk with a tablet from room to room and offer residents the opportunity to meet virtually with the ombudsman. Ombudsmen in many states are holding video meetings to update families and residents with the information they need several times a week, including in the evening when families are available. I want to recognize the work of all 14 EJCC member agencies, each of whom has played an active and vital role in protecting Americans from the effects of COVID-19. That extends from Treasury providing unprecedented amounts of economic aid to DOJ's work putting criminals on notice that we are on the lookout for scams which can present a particular risk to the elderly. All of our EJCC partners in our 14 member agencies are doing impressive work in these extraordinary circumstances. Individually, I applaud your efforts. Collectively, we can be a tremendous force for good, a force that can be truly effective in addressing elder abuse, neglect, and financial exploitation. Again, thank you to each and every one of our EJCC member agencies, your staff, our presenters, and the courageous frontline workers who ensure the health, welfare, and safety of older Americans and all of us each day. I wish you a productive rest of the meeting today.
All right, I want to thank Secretary Azar for providing this video. Welcome to all of us. And of course, we all know how incredibly, almost in an unmatched way, his busy schedule must be, since he sort of is the tip of the spear in the pandemic response and has been really for this calendar year. So his message demonstrates to all of us how important the issues of abuse, neglect, and exploitation remain, and how our attention to this is as important as ever, if not more. I do want to acknowledge that he taped this prior, Cameron, to DHS joining us. So really, it's 15 agencies now, and I want to keep harping on that. That's exciting. And again, we're so glad that the Secretary was able to bring us greetings via video. So now what I want to do is turn to the agenda for today. So because we're doing this virtually, we have changed up our usual meeting format a bit. So when planning this, we knew we would need to keep the meeting moving and that we might probably have exercised a little too much enthusiasm about all the different important topics we want to cover. So it is going to be a tight timeline. And that means as chair, of course, my role is to keep us on time. So I'm gently going to be forewarning all speakers that I'm probably going to have to nudge you. I know you had a lot of great information to share, but we do need to stay on task. And I don't have a virtual gavel, so we'll just have to sort of all agree that we're going to stick to our time frame. So thank you, thank you. And we have about an hour and 45 minutes today. And a couple of the changes that I do want to point out is that first, we're not going to do our usual around the horn agency update. You'll recall we would normally do this and have each agency give a quick report. But instead, just so again, all the members are aware, and then certainly the public that's viewing, we have asked each EJCC member agency to provide a short written update on their elder justice activities since our last meeting in December. And those are going to be available online. We hope to have those up or posted here pretty quickly following this meeting, I would assume within a week or so. Now, the other change that we just wanted to draw out is that because of our meeting platform, we're not going to be able to take questions from the audience. Traditionally, should time have allowed, we would do that. We don't have a mechanism to do that appropriately for today's meeting. So for those that have questions, as you'll note on the slide, you have an opportunity to send us an email. So you can see there that if you do have any question for either the council at large or one of the specific members, you can simply email us at ejcc@acl.hhs.gov. And again, after this meeting, my staff will forward those questions to the right speaker. And again, that email address is ejcc@acl.hhs.gov. Okay. So what's on the agenda? Let's then dig in a little bit and make sure everybody's aware of what's on the agenda. This agenda has been provided to council members in advance. We've also posted it now, so everyone should have an opportunity to follow along. Today, what we're going to do is break it up as we expectedly would into different segments or presentations, which are really nice, quick, informative sound bites, opportunities for us to really walk away having learned quite a bit. So we're going to talk initially about a recent study by the FTC and FINRA that will help us better understand how scams happen. Next, we'll hear from a member of our fellow EJCC group, a number of actual members, who are going to talk about COVID-related government imposter scams and critical enforcement efforts underway to help combat these scams. And then finally, we'll learn about efforts both in the public and private sectors to prevent financial exploitation. So after all speakers on on a panel have completed their presentations, again, as we traditionally would do, I'm going to open it up as time allows for council members to ask questions. So again, there will be a prompt. You'll see the slide. And what we want to do is, of course, have you throughout the presentations kind of jotting down your thoughts so that you'll be ready. We don't have a lot of time for questions. And again, we'll open it up and be able to address as many as we can. So we will announce the question period and then unmute all council members at that time. So again, please keep an eye out for the Q&A slide and then listen for those announcements so that you can be ready for your questions. So without further ado, I'm going to turn the presentation now over to a couple of great colleagues, Gary Motala with the Financial Industry Regulatory Authority, or FINRA, and Emma Fletcher, who is with the Federal Trade Commission, and they're going to kick us off. Their presentation is titled Exposed to Scams, What Separates Victims from Non-Victims. And you note that Gary is the Research Director of Investment Education at FINRA, and then Emma is the Program Analyst at the FTC. So they have a total of 15 minutes, and with that, Gary and Emma, I'm going to open up the floor, and the floor is yours.
Terrific. Thank you so much for the opportunity to speak today. If we could go ahead and move to the first slide. Thank you. Just a little background here. I previously worked for the Better Business Bureau, which is how I became involved with this project. I now work for the Federal Trade Commission, and I do need to make clear that the views expressed here are my own and don't necessarily reflect the views of the Commission or any individual commissioner. And this is actually not an FTC report, but one that I was fortunate to be able to continue to be involved in while with the FTC. First, a little background on the project. The Better Business Bureau launched the BBB Scam Tracker tool in 2015. This is a crowdsourced mapping tool where people can report scams in their community, and other consumers can then look and see what's happening, drill down to their area, as you can see here, and read actual reports from consumers. Scam Tracker was created to help educate consumers, but it also has shown to be useful from a research perspective. Consumers who report sometimes have lost money and sometimes they haven't. So Gary and I connected several years ago to discuss the possibility that Scam Tracker data might be used in fraud research, and that's really how this all started. So I'm going to pass it to Gary now so he can talk about the methodology that was used. If you'd like to go to the next slide. Do we have Gary unmuted? Sorry, this is Gary's slide, but I'm not hearing him.
Can you guys hear me now?
Yes, we can. That's
as God is my witness, I was unmuted. I just unmuted it again and put it back on. So sorry about that. But it's a two-part research project. The first part, we did 18 in-depth interviews, 11 victims of fraud, and 7 people who were targeted for fraud but did not lose money. And based on what we learned from those interviews, we conducted a 15-minute survey. It was an online survey, and we got 1,400 responses. And remember, these were all people who reported to the BBB Scam Tracker database. So we know all of them were targeted for fraud. Some lost money and some didn't. Importantly, this study was fielded in August of 2018. So the data is pre-pandemic. But as you're going to see momentarily, what we learned is very relevant for what's going on in America today. You could jump to the next slide. So the first thing that jumped out at us immediately is there were 3 segments. The first segment was people who did not engage at all. They hung up the phone, they deleted the email, they threw out the direct mail piece. So that was really, really encouraging, that half the people right away said, nope, this is fraud. But then we saw that 30% engaged with the fraudster in some way, maybe exchanged emails or returned a phone call, but eventually figured it out it was a fraud and did not lose any money. And then we had about a quarter, a little less than a quarter of the people, they engaged with the fraudster and ultimately lost money. So what Emma and I are going to talk about for the next several minutes is basically what separates, what separates these three groups. What characteristics are related to somebody who engages or doesn't engage or becomes victimized or doesn't become victimized. And you could go to the next slide. So financial insecurity. So a number of researchers have hypothesized that financial insecurity is related to fraud victimization. The thought being that financial need potentially drives people to take more risk than they would normally take. And we absolutely found that to be the case in our data. I'll just point out the data point that says financially fragile. So we asked people, could you come up with $2,000 in the case of an emergency in a 30-day span? Just you have an emergency, you need $2,000, can you come up with it in 30 days? We didn't ask how they could come up with it. They could put it on a credit card, they could go to a pawn shop, they could borrow it from a friend, they could take it from their bank account. And what we found is that 38% of the victims could not come up with $2,000 in 30 days, a much higher percentage, nearly double the percentage of non-victims at 20%. There are some other data points there you can see. I won't go into them due to time limits, but what I will say is that, this was August of 2018, and there are a lot more people who are financially insecure today as a result of the pandemic than there were before the pandemic. So this particular data point is very relevant in today's America. You can go to the next slide. So social isolation, another part of life in America that's very different today than it was pre-pandemic. A lot more people are socially isolated. And we found that people who were victimized, twice as many people who became victims of fraud said they did not have anybody to speak with about the fraud. That's a pretty big effect. So basically 40% of the victims said they had no one to speak with, compared to 20% of the non-victims. But that second bullet point is particularly important, because what we found is sometimes there's self-imposed social isolation. So someone may have someone to talk to a particular fraudulent offer about, or even a legitimate offer, but they choose not to. There are two examples from the interviews we did. One was a woman who basically, she was a victim of investment fraud, and she said she didn't talk to anybody because she didn't want to be talked out of it. So that was kind of right there, self-imposed social isolation. And another example is a woman who's the victim of an Irs scam, and she was on the phone with the scammer, and she wanted to talk to her mother and kind of say, "Ma, what's going on here?" Her mother was sleeping, so she unfortunately chose not to wake up her mother, and ended up losing money in that scam. So point being that there are people who are naturally socially isolated and people who choose to be. But the bottom line is we need to encourage everyone to reach out to somebody about financial offers. Again, most are going to be legitimate, but many will be fraudulent, and you'll be able to benefit from the collective knowledge of your friends and family. And that's pretty much what I have on the data. I'm going to kick it back to Emma, who's going to talk a little bit more about what we found.
Thanks, Gary. So this slide relates to the increased risk that comes with not talking to anyone or not having anyone to talk to, which Gary just mentioned. There is some good news. When people send money to a scammer, they very frequently do need to talk to someone, and that would be someone at, say, a retailer where they're buying gift cards to pay a scammer, or money orders, maybe a bank where they're withdrawing a large amount of cash, or it could be a wire transfer company. These frontline employees at these businesses can be a last line of defense. Consumers generally do have to interact with someone at the point where they're going through with the scam. And we found, to our surprise, that of those in the group that engaged, 20% said that a third party did try to intervene to stop them from losing money. So that's a pretty good percentage there. More importantly, we found that about 51% actually did not lose money. And you might say, well, 51%, that's still almost half that did lose money, but consider that these are people generally that would be at the very edge. They're right at the point of going through with a financial transaction, sending the money, and they were sort of brought back from the abyss. It's really encouraging, and the 20% figure as well. We know that some companies are training their employees to recognize the signs of fraud, and that's really terrific. So I would say that this is an area where there could be additional research to understand better what works, what doesn't work, and how can we take further advantage of this opportunity that retailers have to really make a difference for these consumers and stop them from going through with losing the money by intervening in this way. I can tell you there's some very heartwarming stories about cashiers and others who have made a real difference in people's lives by stepping up and trying to tell them, you know, don't go forward with this. But it can be difficult because the consumers are generally very much under the control of the scammer at this point. The scammer may have them on the phone still, telling them not to talk to anyone. So it's not an easy task to walk them back, but it is happening, and we believe, you know, with further research and training, it could be happening more. So we can go to the next slide. So I think it goes without saying that there is some stigma and some shame around fraud victimization. This relates to the stereotypes people have about who and who is not likely to lose money to fraud. Many people believe it can't happen to them or it can't happen to people like them. And they have a certain idea of who it would happen to. So we wanted to know, how do victims and non-victims differ in their views about fraud victims? We found that those that did not engage were more likely to see victims as lacking common sense or as gullible. But people who had actually lost money were the most likely to actually blame the victim. Which is really unfortunate. They're blaming themselves. This is important because how people perceive victimization obviously has implications for whether or not they seek help, whether or not they share their experience and talk to other people about it, which we know can really help them and help others. And also, very importantly, whether or not they choose to report what happened. So we can go on to the next slide. So what did reduce the likelihood of engaging? This is where we have some positive news that consumer education does really seem to make a big difference. Prior knowledge is very important. We asked people about whether prior knowledge about how scams work generally or prior experience with scams helped, and we did find that both of those were significant protective factors. Even more important was knowing about the specific scam they were targeted by ahead of time. If they knew about the specific scam, they were 80% less likely to engage and 40% less likely to lose money. So that's really hopeful news. Of course, scams change all the time, so we really have to stay on it, getting information out there about the latest scams that are trending to help as many people as possible. So let's go ahead and go to the next slide. So we wanted to know how our survey respondents learned what they knew about scams, where were they getting their information, and also what did they think would be a good source of information. And you can see here the red bars show that news stories were actually the #1 way people heard about scams and cited as where they got their information, and it was also a top way they wanted to learn about scams, which is terrific. We believe this really speaks to the reach of the media. They can obviously reach so many people, and you know, not necessarily that the information provided is better than information provided in other ways. It may be, it may not be, but they're just simply reaching large numbers of people, just as scammers are reaching large numbers of people. So it's an excellent way to get the word out. My experience has been that the media is often very eager to pick up stories about scams, and to the extent that we can successfully focus them on the scams that are causing the most harm that we see as trending, we can really help a lot of people. Another thing I like about the news as a way to reach people is it's something that can reach people who are not necessarily actively seeking information about scams. Again, most people don't think this will happen to them, so they may not be Googling to learn about the latest scams, but if they're watching the news and the story comes up, they're going to take in that information. People were less likely to think of word of mouth as a good way to learn about scams, but it was actually the number two way people said they have learned about scams. And this is another indication of the importance of just talking about fraud. FTC has a terrific campaign called Pass It On that takes advantage of word of mouth. And of course, all of these other ways of learning about fraud are going to fuel that word of mouth and reach more people than can be reached directly. And with that, I think we're ready for any questions.
All right. Hey, thank you so much, Emma and Gary. I thought that was informative. And Emma, I have for years been very familiar with your Pass It On campaign. So it's affirming to see that word of mouth, that works. I mean, again, the data shows. So that's great. I want to make sure we have an opportunity maybe for one, possibly two questions. Do we have any questions from council members? Be sure to unmute yourself. You have been unmuted by our staff. Any questions?
Hi, this is Michael Herndon. I have one question for either person. Do you see that the sophistication of the scam might have an impact on a victim's likeliness to engage with it? So a really bad scam, they're going to realize it's a scam and move on, versus one that's much more sophisticated might actually trick them.
Yeah, I think that's a fair question. It's a two-way interaction, and there are scammers that have fine-tuned the craft better than others. You know, some very sophisticated scams are actually really widespread. For example, the Social Security scam is quite sophisticated, in my opinion. But it's so widespread, I think we still have a chance to get the word out about it and prevent it, even though it is complicated and sophisticated and not what people would expect or recognize necessarily right away. But we really have to stay on it and watch the data. You know, with the Irs scam, I think eventually it was so ubiquitous people did recognize it. But when the scammers started to switch things up and switch over to SSA, it's more complicated, it's less familiar, and you just got to be on it to get the word out. But yes, I definitely think it's a two-way interaction, and part of it is the consumer aware, and then the other part is, you know, how good is the scammer? So I think we surveyed enough people to still get a good sense of what's happening out there, even though there's going to be some variability on the scammer side.
If I could just add real quickly, we did talk to two scammers from India about the Irs scam, and they said in America it's easier to essentially victimize people because there's so much personal information. First of all, a lot of people have internet access, and a lot of people use social media, so there's a lot of personal information out there. So the scammers are doing their research on individuals before they scam them. So and that's an indication of the sophistication of the scam. So I do think that we don't have a lot of data on it, but there probably is some relationship between the level of sophistication and the success of the scam attempt.
All right, very good. Again, Gary and Emma, great information. Love the comments around social isolation, the role of the third party. I wish we had more time to talk about the stigma around victimization and again, what follow-up often occurs or doesn't occur. Again, maybe that's an opportunity for us to dig in deeper at a future EJCC meeting. So again, I just want to thank you know, both Gary and Emma for the information that they shared, and it's highly informative. So thank you. And what I want to do now, though, is move us on. We're going to try to jump now to the next EJCC member panel, which focuses on government imposter scams. So we have a couple of colleagues who are going to talk to us. Again, their focus is going to be on COVID-related government imposter scams. We have Jeffrey Buckner, who's the Associate Commissioner in the Office of Communications at SSA, and then also Ronald Burke, again, the Executive Director of Pension and Fiduciary Services at the VA. So we've asked these gentlemen to give us kind of a quick update. And with that, both Jeff and Ron, I'm going to turn it over to you guys. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much. And it's so good to be with you and all the listeners here today who are joining us. So for all of us at Social Security, protecting elder adults from abuse and neglect and exploitation continues to be a priority for us during this time. As you all can imagine, older Americans and others are among the population with underlying conditions and some of the most vulnerable and hardest hit by the current pandemic. I want to assure you that during this, we are still here to help the public. So even though we are not able to provide walk-in service right now in our offices, our employees are working tirelessly and remotely to ensure that our beneficiaries don't experience any interruptions with their monthly benefits, that others can apply for benefits and provide other help. And that's available by phone. You can call your local office or our national 800 number. And of course, SSA.gov, we have many, many self-service options as well. But unfortunately, there are scams, and two in particular that remain a concern are people claiming that we will suspend benefits due to COVID-19, as well as fraudulent Medicare tests and other types of scams related to people sharing their personal information. We did partner with our Office of the Inspector General to expand our public awareness campaign about these fraudulent communications, whether it's in form of a letter or a text message, email, or a phone call. And again, we want to assure all of our beneficiaries and any new beneficiaries that we are not and will not suspend any payments because of COVID-19. So there are some other examples, and if you can go ahead to the next slide, thank you. So our Office of the Inspector General has taken several important steps, including what you see here, releasing a fraud advisory. They continue to monitor COVID-19 scam trends, and they updated their online reporting form, which, by the way, is available in English and Spanish for people to report scams. And we do have an English and Spanish language coronavirus page at ssa.gov/coronavirus. And as you can see how many times it's been viewed, over 5.7 million times. We do include scam information here, and we'll help refer people to where they can go to report those scams. And we would encourage anybody to go ahead and please check out these pages. And we also send a subscription notification to subscribers of this page so that they can be proactively informed, as we like to say. And lastly, we also have been participating with AARP. They're a very important partner with us. So we actually participated in a scam awareness webinar where we help provide consumers information about reporting these scams. And on the next slide. So we are continuing to prevent scammers from spoofing our phone numbers. Emma was talking about how sophisticated some of these scammers are, and that is absolutely true. So we are doing everything we can to prevent people from spoofing, pretending to be our Social Security offices when they receive an incoming call. And we're also working really closely with our IG to stop, not just to stop the spoofed call, but to actually terminate the phone numbers that these scammers are actually using. All very important. And lastly, just to give you a little quick update, we have been running a public service announcement, and it was great to see on the previous presentation how the public would like to see information. It was a pretty high statistic about public service announcements. And these are an example here of how our TV and radio announcements have done. And again, in partnership with our OIG, which is fantastic. I want to give another shout out to our IG. As you can tell, they are a huge partner with us. We cannot do this alone, just within the Social Security family itself. But I do want to give a shout out to our IG. They are the lead investigative agency, and they have worked very closely and continue to work closely with the Department of Justice to stop foreign-based scam calls. So again, this is actually results. It's not just warning people about it, but actually stopping people. And again, our other partners here, FCC and FTC, are wonderful to collaborate with to help get the message out. On March 5th, on March 5th of this year, our OIG helped sponsor a Slam the Scam Day that we use to help kind of resonate this message out there with the public, to educate them about scams that are out there. And again, what is the benefit of all of this? And on the next slide, I just want to highlight some examples to show, I'm sorry, if you can go back, thank you so much, is to show you some of the really positive results of the scams. So just as a quick example, in April, we had about 5,500 scam complaints come into the IG, compared to 48,000 in March, 80,000 in February. This is all really good news, as is a reduction in spoofing attempts. And again, we couldn't do this without our partners. But as good as that all is, we can't rest on our laurels. And we don't know if this is a temporary downward trend or not, maybe or maybe not due to the current pandemic. So on the next slide, I just want to highlight just a couple things for you. So in particular, I want to give a shout out to Gary Barksdale and his folks at the United States Postal Inspection Service. We actually met for the first time at the last EJCC meeting and talked about other ways that we can work collaboratively to get the message out about scams to the public. And I am so excited, and I cannot thank Gary and his team enough, that literally just a couple weeks ago, Gary and his folks, myself and our partners in our Inspector General's office, we signed an MOU to display scam awareness posters in every post office throughout the country. This is really such a fantastic opportunity to help get the word out. So again, I can't thank you enough. And we're also partnering with quasi-public and private organizations. And one other example is the American Association of Motor Vehicle Administrators. And they have committed to working with their public affairs specialists and motor vehicle administrators throughout the country to help share with their customers information about Social Security scams. And of course, we really welcome everybody's engagement with us at any level, federal, state, and local. We're also engaging with various business and trade organizations to help, and so many have. I just want to close by, again, saying how much we appreciate partnering with everyone, looking at future partnerships. I invite you to reach out to me if you would like to engage with us, and I'd be happy to connect you with someone on my team to talk about how we can do that. And we would like to help share your message as well. We'd like to reciprocate. And again, lastly, we are committed to helping our vulnerable population. And we just want to thank you for allowing us to be part of this important body and having a chance to share information today. So thank you. So Ron, I'll go ahead and turn it over to you.
All right, thanks, Jeff. I appreciate that. Good morning, everyone. I'd like to thank Assistant Secretary Lance Robertson for convening and leading this meeting today, and for continuing to allow the Department of Veterans Affairs to participate in this important group. I'm honored to represent VA in this panel discussion and look forward to continued cooperation with the other 14 federal agencies in protecting individuals against abuse, neglect, and fraud. In addition to healthcare, VA also serves veterans and beneficiaries by providing benefit payments for disabilities, pensions, educational assistance, and guarantees of home loans under the umbrella of VBA, the Veterans Benefits Administration. According to our latest data, VBA provides disability compensation to approximately 5 million veterans, pension benefits to over 450,000 beneficiaries, education benefits to approximately 900,000 beneficiaries, and guarantees approximately 3.35 million VA home loans. Additionally, VHA, the Veterans Health Administration, has approximately 9.2 million veterans enrolled to receive medical care. VBA takes a multi-level approach to protecting veterans and beneficiaries from abuse, neglect, and fraud. As part of VA, Pension and Fiduciary Service continues to adapt to the challenges that COVID-19 has presented during this unprecedented time. According to our latest data, 47% of the veteran population is over the age of 65. As those veterans continue to age, their needs also change. VA has a duty to protect our most vulnerable veterans by appointing a fiduciary when it is determined that a beneficiary is no longer able and competent to handle their personal finances. Under normal circumstances, a field examiner would travel physically to the beneficiary's home or the location of the proposed fiduciary to conduct face-to-face interviews and assessments to provide evidence for the appointment of a fiduciary. In order to protect our employees and the health and welfare of this vulnerable population of veterans, Pension and Fiduciary Service redefined how those interviews were conducted. And in March, we partnered with Vocational Rehabilitation and Employment Services to provide a secure video platform for field examiners to interview VA beneficiaries and proposed fiduciaries. Currently, VA conducts interviews with a smartphone or computer over the secure platform called Virtual Video Connect. The new platform has helped field examiners conduct more interviews in a shorter amount of time without sacrificing the health or welfare of those that we serve. And this is an important part of our oversight responsibilities. We also launched a new platform called Clear that improves the process for completing background investigations when appointing a fiduciary. The new platform provides the field examiner with green, yellow, or red banners based on risk and indicate the level of risk associated with the fiduciary. Clear makes the investigation quicker, less subjective, and makes it possible to re-examine fiduciaries periodically. Prior to this enhancement, we did not have the ability to go back annually and ensure that somebody who was appointed as a fiduciary didn't find themselves in harm's way. We now have the ability on an annual basis to check all 170,000 pending fiduciaries to ensure they have not found themselves in harm's way. And we do this by checking background investigations, making sure that there's no evidence of conviction of elder abuse, embezzlement, things of that nature. And so it's another enhanced portion of our oversight responsibility. Unfortunately, there are people who continue to prey on the elderly. VA has partnered with law enforcement agencies to hold those that try to exploit our most vulnerable beneficiaries accountable. In February, a former VA fiduciary in Nevada pled guilty to mail fraud. The woman submitted false claims on behalf of veterans without their knowledge or consent and altered medical records to qualify for additional benefits. The total loss to VA was approximately $1.8 million. The investigation was a collaboration between the VA, the Office of Inspector General, and the FBI. In March, a former VA fiduciary was sentenced to prison for 20 years after being found to have used $3.2 million of VA benefits intended for 52 veterans to purchase homes, vehicles, luxury recreational vehicles, and personal cruises. This investigation was a collaboration between the VA OIG, Social Security Administration, OIG, FBI, and the Internal Revenue Service Criminal Investigations Division. Therefore, collaboration with many folks on this council. Recently, scammers have made attempts to target recipients of the Medal of Honor, the highest military decoration for valor. A group of scammers has used public knowledge about the recipients of the Medal of Honor and then used the information to submit applications to change payment information with the VA. The Medal of Honor recipient does not realize their bank account information has been changed until their monthly VA benefits do not appear on their bank statements. VA has implemented additional safeguards and has provided warnings to those who are potentially at risk. Going back to the first presentation of today, communicating the scam has significantly helped this population of our veteran force. Starting in June of 2020, the Veterans Health Administration will begin forming the National Social Work Tiger Team for Elder Abuse for work throughout fiscal year 2021. More details about the Tiger Team will be provided during our next meeting, and I'll be happy to share that. In closing, VA is always reviewing other potential collaborations to increase protections for veterans and beneficiaries who are vulnerable to abuse, neglect, and financial exploitation. I want to thank everybody for their time, and thank you for your service to our elder population. Thank you.
All right. Hey, thanks so much, Jeff and Ron. Again, very informative. Thank you. Thank you. Good to hear about activities happening at both SSA and the VA. We're going to go ahead and move on then to the next panel. Before we do, though, I want to remind everybody, both council members and then those listening otherwise, that you can send questions in to us at EJCC@acl.hhs.gov. And again, I'll repeat that again. But I want to go ahead and jump now to the enforcement member panel for the EJCC. We've asked them to talk about COVID-related government imposter scams. As I mentioned at the beginning, we have 4 colleagues presenting to us. We have Luis from the FTC, Tony from Department of Justice, Gary from the Postal Service, and Michael from CFPB. So again, for sake of time, I'd like to ask each panel member to just be as efficient as possible with your remarks. I know you're excited and you have a lot of good information to share. We'll be all ears, and we're going to take it in that order. So I'm going to go ahead now and turn the floor over to the full panel, but we're going to start with Luis. So the floor is yours, ma'am.
Good morning, everybody. I'm delighted to be here. And thank you, Lance, and I'm very happy to be here with members of the council. I'll begin with my standard disclaimer. The views I express are my own and not necessarily those of the commission or any individual commissioner. So let's get started. The FTC's Consumer Sentinel Network received some 3 million reports from consumers directly and also from our data contributors. These reports cover a whole range of issues. The information is used by federal, state, and local law enforcement to support cases challenging illegal conduct. The information is also critical to enable us to analyze patterns and trends, and we use those analyses to form our strategic planning and also outreach. Now, contrary to what most people think, adults age 60 and older are less likely than younger adults to report losing money to fraud. Younger adults reported losing money more often, but, and this is a major but, when older adults do report losing money, the dollar amounts are higher than those for younger adults. And this is reflected on the chart that you see, which comes from an interactive portal on our website. As you'll see there, from March 31 in 2020, those 80 and over reported a median loss of $1,500. So let's move on, as we've heard from other speakers today. From the Consumer Sentinel Network, what we know is that government imposter scams have been the top fraud for the past several years. And no surprises, you see Social Security Administration, Health and Human Services, Medicare, even the FTC has been impersonated. And the data for 2019 indicates that we've got nearly 400,000 reports. The median loss was 1,100. What I find especially interesting, and what you see in the lower right-hand side, of those who reported to us about a government imposter scam, only 4.8% actually reported losing money. That's too high, of course, but it is interesting to observe that the vast majority of people who encounter a government imposter scam identify it and take the time to report to us. And let's move on. The FTC Sentinel Network analyzes complaints that refer to either COVID or the coronavirus. The slide you're looking at is a bit dated. Now we're up to 67,000 reports so far, and some of them have quite high dollar losses. This information is on the FTC's website, and it is updated regularly. Keep in mind, what you see is the largest complaint category involves travel and vacation reports. These are largely about cancellation of travel plans and refund issues. Going ahead to the next slide. This is the FTC dedicated webpage on the coronavirus. It too is updated regularly and serves up rich information about the types of scams that we're seeing and contains links to educational materials. On the right-hand side is an infographic that you can share with people in your community using newsletters, etc. It is available in Spanish, and we really hope you will use it and share it. Moving on, the next slide gives you a top-level look at the types of scams that we're seeing in connection with the pandemic. From pills, ointments, IV therapies, and more, an important part of the FTC's work is targeting companies that make claims without scientific proof. Since March, the FTC has sent out more than 200 warning letters to marketers making COVID-19 health-related claims for their products and services. A good number of these letters were issued jointly with the FDA. These letters tell the companies to immediately stop making claims that their products can treat, prevent, or cure the coronavirus. Recipients are also told to notify the FTC within 48 hours of the specific actions they've taken to address the agency's concerns. And the letters also note that if the false claims do not cease, the Commission may go into federal district court to cease them. And in fact, in April, the FTC did just that. It announced a case against Whole Leaf Organics for claiming to treat, for claims that the products could treat both the coronavirus and cancer without any proof that it could do either. In a similar vein, the FTC sent 2 rounds of warning letters to multi-level marketers stating that they or their distributors are making unsupported claims that their products can treat or prevent COVID-19. The letters to some MLMs also went a critical step further, where we saw that the MLM or its distributors, preying upon those who have recently lost their jobs, were trying to recruit people to join by saying people could make a lot of money working from home. That's simply not true. Most people who join MLMs make little or no money. Moving on, robocalls. To no surprise, the next slide shows that scammers have taken to robocalls to get into the coronavirus business, offering a range of products and treatments for the disease. But they're also tailoring some of their existing robocall scams. So we've seen some involving Social Security Administration, as well as mortgage and student loan debt relief scams. To address these illegal calls, and the prior speaker touched on this, the FTC again, and at least initially, has relied upon warning letters to VoIP providers, voice over internet providers, and to others that are involved in robocalls using coronavirus-related messages. These letters warn the recipients that assisting and facilitating those robocalls is against the law. As with other warning letters, recipients were told to stop the calls within 48 hours. 6 of the recent warning letters to recipients were issued jointly with the FCC. So the next slide, please. Even before the ink was dry on the CARES Act, scammers have been targeting people with fake relief checks and schemes, exploiting the uncertainty about government programs and payments. We've seen a number of scammers target small businesses and nonprofits as well. This slide shows a clip of a press release from April for a case the FTC filed against a company that allegedly claimed to be part of the SBA's Paycheck Protection Program, but it wasn't. Unfortunately, we've seen a significant increase in the rise of identity theft reports related to the pandemic. Scammers have used other people's information to claim unemployment benefits as well as stimulus funds. For stolen stimulus check claims, the FTC has worked very closely with the IRS and modified the identity theft website to take reports. Identitytheft.gov will help people report the problem to the FTC and also, importantly, complete and electronically file an identity theft directly with the IRS. In a slightly different vein, but I think of much relevance here, I want to flag a consumer alert that the FTC issued in May about reports that nursing homes and assisted living facilities were making residents sign over their stimulus checks to the facility because they're on Medicaid. In fact, the CARES Act made crystal clear that those funds belong to the recipients and not the facility. So to sum up, stay informed. Here you have information on how to subscribe to FTC's consumer alerts. As we learned from earlier panelists, knowing what's going on is incredibly important and provides a critical means on how to avoid being scammed. With that, I thank you all very much.
Produced by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services at taxpayer expense.